God bless everybody. Pastor Carlos here. Actually, I'm speaking to you today out of Pennsylvania. So I'm here, spending the night, traveling back home tomorrow. But I wanted to stop in and just speak to you guys about prayer. In the last few weeks, we've been discussing prayer and fasting. I talked about why fast. I talked about fasting for a revelation, not for power. But tonight, just want to speak to you about prayer. Many people have asked me the question, how do you pray? Can you give me any tips for prayer? And I think one of the most important things that you can see from the book of Luke, chapter 11, is that Jesus speaks to his disciples. And after the disciples ask him a question, they ask Jesus a question, can you teach us to pray the way John the Baptist's disciples taught them to pray? And in essence, Jesus responds to his disciples, when you pray, pray like this. Some scriptures or some renditions like the Passion Translation will say Jesus gave them a model prayer. And that's wonderful because actually what he did afterwards was he gave them a model. But the one thing I liked about the King James and also the New King James, it says that after they ask a question, Jesus says, when you pray. And it's very interesting that when you go to a new job and you want to learn a new trade or you start a new job and you're doing the training, typically they'll give you a bunch of manuals, they'll talk to you, train you. But one of the things they will always tell you is, don't worry about it. You're going to learn on the job. As soon as you begin to do it, you're going to get better. You're going to learn. And I think with prayer is that simple. You actually start praying. And as you start praying, you'll develop a prayer lifestyle, also a prayer language. So tonight, I want to kind of shift this focus and this attention to a distinct manner of looking at prayer. And I want to look at prayer as not praying from earth to heaven, but from heaven to earth. And I think it's very important that as you develop your prayer life, you develop a prayer life with the consciousness of your desire to have heaven come down to earth rather than having your earth's mindset trying to infiltrate heaven and vice versa. Not that there's a right or a wrong way, but I want to just give you a little insight to a story from the book of Genesis, chapter 28. And you guys are pretty familiar with the story of Jacob and the ladder. But I want to give you a little glimpse at some key elements that took place in this story. When you read the story, Jacob is journeying, and he journeys to a place that he later calls Bethel. And he stops at this place called Bethel to rest. And as he lays down and he falls asleep on a very comfortable rock, and the rock was his pillow. And as he falls asleep, he has this dream. He has something that just happens through his night, and he sees this ladder, and the ladder is coming down to the foot of the earth, and from the foot of the earth, it goes up to heaven, and he sees angels ascending and descending. After he wakes up, he says, surely God was in this place, and I almost missed it. And that's very important. Because sometimes we go around the place and we know that God is omnipotent, we know he's omniscient, and we know he's omnipresent. And although we know he's omnipresent, we still miss his presence. And here's a man that recognized after, he says, I almost missed it. I almost missed the Lord here. But once he realized this revelation, he says something. He says, I was afraid, and I said, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God. And this is the gate of heaven. So he calls the presence of God, or he calls the place where he felt the presence of God, where he had the revelation of God's presence, he calls that place church, the house of God. It's actually a place outdoors. It's actually a place of just rest. And in this place, he calls this place the house of God. Where the presence was, became the house of God. But he also says, this is the gateway of heaven. Excuse me. So what I want to focus on is this term gate. And gate is typically a barrier in between two locations. So if you go into my house, you have to actually open up a gate in order to put the car into the driveway. And so literally you have streets divided by gate, and the other side is going to be my home. So in essence, I have a barrier dividing the street from my home. once you cross the gate, you enter into a different territory that's owned by a different owner. It's owned by myself. And so what I want to take you to is this story here where Jacob is actually saying that this place is called the house of God is actually a gateway to heaven. In essence, where the presence of God is actually a gateway to allow us to enter into another realm or another dimension. Just think about that for a second, because later on in the New Testament, in the book of John, you're going to see Jesus. He calls Philip, and Philip tells his buddy Nathanael, hey, Nathanael, the one that we've been waiting for, he's here. And he says, all right, well, how do you know it's he? He said, just come follow. And Jesus is walking down, and Jesus sees Nathanael. Hey, that man right there, he's a true Israelite. And he says, how do you know me? He says, well, before Nathanael called you over, I saw you sitting under the fig tree, and that was it. Just a word of knowledge convinced him to give his life and follow Jesus. And Jesus says, man, if that impressed you, you have no idea what's going to take place. From now on, you're going to see angels ascending and descending, and greater things you shall see. So in essence, here is in the New Testament a revelation accepted when they saw truth in Jesus. I am the way, the truth, and the life. So once they saw the revelation truth in Jesus, he says, if you follow me, you're going to have a revelation of truth, a revelation of a realm that goes into heaven where the angels will ascend and descend. You're going to actually see a gateway to heaven. In other words, in the presence of Jesus, entered in a gateway even for Nathanael that allowed him to see the realm of heaven. I too came into my knowledge of Jesus Christ through a revelation, through a dream, that I tapped into heaven. And I don't want to get too deep into mysticism right now, but even when you read the scripture that says that in my Father's house there's many mansions. Here in Genesis, he says, and this is the house of God, the presence of God. This is the house of God. But then he says, in my Father's house, there's many mansions, and I'm going to prepare a place for you in that location. Could it be a different way to look at this? Could it be that when Jesus died, resurrected, and then ascended, could it be that he ascended to give us access to many rooms in his Father's house? Now, I've had dreams of body parts, in heaven, in certain rooms. I'll go into the heavenly realm and I see body parts. At one time, I saw a body part of an esophagus. And I woke up, I told my wife, hey, hon, I had a dream. This dream, I saw an esophagus. It was nuts. They had a lot of body parts. And at that time, I had a stowaway in the back of my truck, just for extra cargo space. And I began to fill the stowaway with body parts. And the last body part I put in that stowaway in my dream was actually an esophagus. Well, my wife and I go out, and as we go out, I come across an individual, and I just have a word of knowledge that they needed prayer. And I said, you have a condition with your esophagus, don't you? She says, yes. How do you know? I said, it just came to me, but don't you worry. I have an esophagus right in the stowaway. And I went to the stowaway. I grabbed from the supernatural, from heavenly realm, from that room. I grabbed the esophagus. I put it in her throat. She felt immediately a heat sensation in her body, and she was completely healed. I was actually testifying about that particular story to a pastor at another location, upstate New York. And as I testify, she says, wow, I need an esophagus too. I said, don't you worry. I have the stowaway right there, and I have extra parts there. Another time I went into heaven, into another room, because there's many rooms there. And I went to another room. There was a library, and there was one book, a big book, and all the questions that anyone ever has, the answer was in this book. And I went there, just began to just look at these questions. It was amazing. Could it be that when Jesus says, I'm going to prepare a place for you, that another way to look at it is that he was going to prepare a place for us to give us access to different dimensions in the house of our Father? I don't know. It's just a wild thought that I've been contemplating as of late. But in God's presence It's called his house, and there's a gate that takes us from one realm to the next. Do you know that Jesus says that we are seated with him in heavenly places? So actually, while we're here in this physical dimension, in this physical realm called earth, we are also seated with Jesus Christ in heavenly places. It's interesting to just have this idea. If you look at the book of Kings, First Kings, and you look at chapter 17, Elijah actually is standing before the courtrooms of Ahab, and he's saying, hey, no more rain is coming down until I say so. But he says, I stand in front of you and in front of God. In essence, he's saying it in chapter 17, I'm in front of you, but I'm also standing in front of God. Like simultaneously, he says, he didn't say, I prayed and stood in the counsel of God and heard God tell me to say no more rain. He's saying, I'm standing in front of you while I'm in the presence of God. You know, your prayer life could take a different level if you begin to understand your ability to tap into the realm called heaven. The realm called heaven that Jesus has prepared for you and I to just have access to the throne room of heaven and just pray with that mindset, heaven to earth. And Jesus simply said it as he taught his disciples to pray. He says, when you pray, pray this way. Our Father who is or who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. He says, thy kingdom come and thy will be done where? On earth as it is in heaven. Jesus taught his disciples a key principle that as the will of God is in heaven, it shall be here on earth. In essence, everything Jesus spoke, he says, I speak everything I've heard my daddy speak in heaven. And I do everything I saw my Father do where? In heaven. The revelation was from heaven to earth. So I just want to share with you tonight, if you don't mind, the concept of your prayers changing instead of earth to heaven, from heaven to earth. Just think about that for a second. As you contemplate, and later on I'll probably go over the whole model prayer, and we'll kind of, touch in that subject for the next few vlogs. But I want you to think, everything that Jesus spoke to his disciples was about our ability to extend and stretch our faith. He says, oh, ye of little faith. Ye of little. He just kept telling people, hey, awaken. You can do so much more. Greater things than these shall you see and do. Could it be that he wanted us to know that he would never leave us or forsake us? Those rooms he's going to prepare, he says, hey, I'm preparing a room so one day we could be together again. Well, guess what? It's a temporary place in heaven right now, but we aren't meant to live in heaven. We're meant to reign with him here on earth. So I just want to share these thoughts with you as you pray. If you want to learn how to pray, I challenge you to begin to pray. And then I challenge you to do one extra thing. As you pray, pray the Father's will upon your life and those that you pray for. If somebody's sick, I want you to think, does my Father want to see this person sick? And if the answer is no, and your daddy in heaven doesn't want to see them sick because he's a perfect God, then what I want you to do is I want you to pray that prayer and that revelation upon them. Say, be healed by the stripes of Jesus Christ, because he heals every single person he came across when he walked here on earth. God bless you. I look forward to speaking to you again. Don't forget to subscribe. Bye-bye.